They controlled railroads, oil, steel, and banking, building fortunes so massive they reshaped America. Titans like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, they didn't just dominate industries, they became them. And over a century later, the names have changed, but the playbook hasn't. Today's tech giants use data instead of railroads, and algorithms instead of oil, but the result is the same. No competition, no choice, and near total control. This is the story of monopolies, then and now. Let's go. In the late 1800s, America was transforming fast. The Gilded Age wasn't just a name, but a reality. On the surface, there was glittering prosperity, booming cities, luxurious mansions, and technology marvels like the light bulb and the telephone. But underneath it, it was a time of deep inequality, brutal labor conditions, and unchecked corporate ambition. Now, powered by industrialization, mass immigration, this era became the perfect breeding ground for economic empires. And at the center of it all was a few powerful men. John D. Rockefeller with Standard Oil, Andrew Carnegie with U.S. Steel, and J.P. Morgan with banking and railroads. Now, they just didn't compete. They crushed the competition. Standard Oil at its peak controlled over 90% of America's oil refining. Carnegie Steel fed the railroads and skyscrapers of a growing empire. And Morgan, he wasn't just a banker. He financed the system itself, even bailing out the U.S. government during a financial crisis. This was an era where corporations became kingdoms, CEOs became kings, and monopolies weren't just a business plan, but a blueprint for domination. Now, to build their empires, they didn't rely on luck or fair competition. They used calculated tactics to make their industries into closed systems, and their rivals destroyed or absorbed. Here's how they did it. First off is vertical integration, which is controlling every step of the process. Now, Carnegie was a master of this. He didn't just own the steel mills, he owned the iron mines, the railroads, the ships, and even the coal fields that fueled the furnaces. That meant every time steel was produced, he controlled the cost at every level, and no one stood a chance. Next up is horizontal integration, which is eliminating all competition on one level. Rockefeller's Standard Oil perfected this. He bought out entire refineries all across the country using secret deals and price wars to drive out others into bankruptcy before absorbing their businesses. By 1880, his empire refined 9 out of every 10 barrels of oil in the United States. Next is predatory pricing, which is lowering your prices below cost to destroy competitors, then raising them once you're the only game in town. This tactic wasn't about profit, it was about eliminating threats. Rockefeller, for example, could sell oil at a loss because he owned the supply chain. Smaller businesses couldn't compete and collapsed under the pressure. And lastly, trusts, forming secret alliances to dominate entire sectors. By the 1880s, massive companies began forming trusts, agreements among once competing firms to act as one entity. These trusts fixed prices, rigged supply, and kept new players out. Consumers were left with one choice. Prices rise, wages stayed low, and the wealth pooled at the top. And while these tactics made industrialists rich, they also sparked public outrage. Political cartoons called them robber barons, while journalists started exposing these backroom deals. Slowly but surely, the American people began to realize something. That this wasn't capitalism, it was total control. By the early 1900s, the public had enough. Now, monopolies weren't just influencing the economy, they were dictating it. Prices were kept high, wages were kept low, and small businesses were being suffocated out of the industry. The average American felt like they were pawns in someone else's game. In response, a new kind of leader emerged. Someone who saw big business not as progress, but as a threat to democracy. Enter Theodore Roosevelt. Known as the Trust Buster, Roosevelt believed that no private interest, no matter how wealthy, could be above the law. And under his administration, the government dusted off an old piece of legislation. The Sherman Antitrust Act, passed in 1890, but rarely enforced. Now, this law made it illegal for companies to restrain trade or attempt to monopolize markets, and under Roosevelt, it finally had teeth. And the most famous target? Standard Oil. And after years and years of public pressure and investigation, in 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was in violation of the antitrust law and ordered it to be broken up into 34 separate companies. This wasn't just a business breakup, it was a declaration of power. For the first time, the federal government had gone toe-to-toe with the richest man in America and won. Now, ironically, the breakup actually didn't hurt Rockefeller. Since he had shares in all 34 companies and competition was once again in the oil market, his shares exploded in value. But that's besides the point. However, the Roosevelt administration didn't just fight Standard Oil. It also broke up railroad monopolies like Northern Securities Company, took on meatpacking, tobacco, and telegraph giants, and laid the foundation for future regulations like the FTC and the Clayton Antitrust Act. This era marked the first serious attempt to rein in corporate power, protect consumers, workers, and the free market. But as we'll see, this was only a temporary victory, because the tactics would evolve, the industries would change, and monopolies, well, they just got smarter. Fast forward to today, and we have a new group of monopolies that have emerged. Not in oil, steel, or banking, but in technology and data. Amazon, which controls nearly 40% of all e-commerce in the United States. Google handles over 90% of global search traffic. Apple, which dominates the smartphone market and app ecosystem. Meta, formerly known as Facebook, owns the most used platforms on the planet. Instead of railroads, they control infrastructure like cloud services, app stores, and ad networks. And instead of oil, they're mining user data. Like the tycoons of the past, today's tech giants use monopoly tactics to dominate the market. First off is acquisitions, which is swallowing competitors before they become a threat. Facebook bought Instagram and WhatsApp. Google took over YouTube and Android. And Amazon acquired Whole Foods, Twitch, and Ring. Walled gardens. Apple's iOS and Apple Store strictly control what apps can do and how users access them. Once you're in their ecosystem, it's hard to leave. Algorithmic domination. Google controls what you search, and Amazon decides what products show up first. These algorithms shape the market, often in the company's favor. Infrastructure control. Amazon Web Services power massive portions of the internet, including many of its own rivals, while Google Ad Network is the backbone of online revenue. And scale is a weapon. With virtually unlimited capital, these companies can move faster, collect more data, and outlast the challengers. Regulations simply can't keep up. Like Standard Oil pipelines or Carnegie rail-fed steel, today's monopolies control the digital infrastructure the modern world runs on. But here's the sad twist. For many years, we welcomed it. We liked the speed, the convenience, the innovation. We handed over our data, our attention, and our loyalty, often without reading the fine print. But just like during the Gilded Age, the convenience came at a cost. Less competition, fewer choices, higher fees, and unprecedented influence over everything from politics to personal privacy. Governments are once again starting to push back. In the United States, for example, the FTC and DOJ have filed antitrust lawsuits against Google, Apple, Amazon, and Meta, accusing them of stifling competition, exploiting users, and abusing their market power. In Europe, the Digital Markets Act is forcing these companies to open their platforms, stop self-preferencing, and allowing greater data transparency. Today's monopolies are moving faster than legislation. They operate across borders, influence billions of people, and adapt their models constantly. And now, with the rise of artificial intelligence, they're not just controlling what we buy or see, they're controlling how we think, communicate, and create. These companies aren't just marketplaces anymore. They're infrastructure, and that makes regulating them not only harder, but urgently necessary. Just like the Dutch East India Company and Standard Oil before them, today's monopolies didn't just capture the markets, they captured the system. Whether it's the 1600s, 1900s, or 2020s, even though the tools may change, the goal stays the same. Control the infrastructure, destroy the competition, and own the future. Let me know in the comments down below if you think we're entering a new Gilded Age, and with that, I'm Evan, and thanks for watching. If you liked what you just saw, then click on the video here. Also, if you haven't, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any future videos.